Kia ora koutou, no mai, haere mai. Welcome to our webinar on Drinking Water Network Environmental Performance Measures. And thank you for making the time to focus on this important proposal. I'm Simone Blackburn, a Senior Policy Advisor here at Taumata Arowai, and we'll kick off with our whakatauki. Ko te wai aho, ko aho te wai. He whakata tūranga tātou no te wai. Ko te ora te wai, ko te ora o te tangata. He toanga te wai me te aki, ko o wai tātou, ko wai tātou. So to me, our mihi is very simple. It's simply about people and water, tangata e wai, and their connection to one another. And what we're talking about today, network environmental performance, is just one example of how those two things are so interconnected. Cool. So today we'll cover a proposed approach to monitoring and reporting on the environmental performance of drinking water networks. We'll hear from Bill Bayfield, our Chief Executive. Bill will give an overview of the requirements, who they'll apply to, and why they are being introduced. Then we'll hear from Isabel Oldfield, our Lead Policy Advisor. She'll run through the measures and outline next steps for this work. And once we've heard from Bill and Isabel, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation, pop them in the chat and we'll keep a watch on the chat and then answer these at the end. And with that, I will hand over to Bill. Sorry, Bill, you're on mute.
Somebody had to do it, didn't they? I apologise. Kia ora tātou. Ko wai ahau, ko Bill Bayfield ahau. Te tumu whakarai o Taumata Arowai. And thanks, Simone, for the introduction. One of our new stars that's joined Taumata Arowai. We're kicking off around network performance, and this is very much a first for us and for New Zealand. We're beginning something that I think many other jurisdictions, regimes have been long involved in, and so it's good to be able to consult with you and to take your advice. So let's just move to the first slide, and I'll cover. We've got 7 documents out which are fleshing out the start of our regulatory framework under the Water Services Act, and this is just one of them. And nor should I tell you otherwise than to believe that I think we'll be consulting for a couple of years yet in various batches as we go through growing our knowledge and our understanding. So consultation with us might be pretty constant. But the draft drinking water network environmental performance measures are really important. They're a bit different because this is a discussion document and they're open until the 28th of March, obviously, and then we'll work out exactly what the measures are that we'll begin to collect from the 1st of July this year. Next slide. One of the key things for me to get across, it's really important that I do so. There's a lot of misunderstanding out there at the moment, and that is that the drinking water network environmental performance measures only apply to the large drinking water suppliers, the large networks and network operators. So really that's only those networks that are operated on behalf of councils, council-controlled organisations, and the occasional government departments. The measures that we're planning will be phased in, and so we'll begin this year. So this is our first year. The first group of these measures will be put out 1st of July 22. We'll come again with further measures to add to them in 23, and probably around 24 we should hit the full suite in terms of drinking water, and that'll coincide with the formation and start of the 4 entities that are proposed to be formed. We should also recall that we're not just about drinking water, and that network performance measures will undoubtedly come into play on both wastewater and stormwater. They're due to commence our functions in wastewater and stormwater in November 2023, so at the end of 2023. And while it'd be fair to say that the wastewater provisions relatively straightforward and will parallel the drinking water questions in many respects. Those on stormwater are still under consideration, and who knows, they may yet be delayed. Next slide. This is a classic, isn't it? You just can't fix what you can't see, and this is why we need to ask these questions. It's why performance monitoring and network performance monitoring is so important to us, and it's something that we really haven't done before. So we need to start collecting the data so that we can all see what's going on with the network. There's a suggestion that we haven't invested well in the past because we don't understand our systems fully. And so we need measurements over time to make sure that we're all contributing to an improvement and to an achievement of the outcomes that we all seek in terms of, in this case, drinking water. As I said before, this kind of monitoring is pretty common overseas. In fact, there's an awful lot of people who are a bit surprised that we haven't done it to date, but we're just starting. And so we'll start slowly and we'll build. But I think that basically, if you think about our mihi that Simone started with, really without this information, you're really not delivering on protecting either the health of te tangata or te tau. Next slide takes us to why introduce. So we want the transparency on the performance of networks. The impacts they have on public health and the environment are really important to us. And I'll come up to the environmental matters in a minute on drinking water, and to contribute to that continuous improvement of the quality of water services. We know that councils have been asked for the request for information associated with the Three Waters reform, and that was a pretty fulsome task, and all of you did remarkably well. We also know that there is likely to be similar information requested by other agencies. And what you need to know from us is that we're working very closely with those agencies to manage any overlaps and make the delivery of data to be as simple as possible. And we're also working in very close conjunction with the Three Waters team, particularly the National Transition Unit, and really thinking with them about what we ask for. In the end, whatever they set up will also come through into the water service entity, so it's really important. We're also working very closely at the moment with the MB and the Commerce Commission to integrate with any future economic regulator. I think that's one of the things we need to stress is if we're to do a good job as Taumata Arowai as a water quality and water quantity regulator, then we need a partner, which is the economic regulator. And so it'd be really silly for us to be asking questions that were repeated by the economic regulator or that the information wasn't used by both of us. So those discussions are kicking off right now. Next slide. And talk about the impact on the environment. And Taumata Arowai takes a huge lead from the principles of Te Mana o Te Wai. We're quite unique still as a Crown entity in that they're built into our legislation as applying to anybody who has a functional duty under our Act, including us, of course. And so that means that this brings a real, we've called it Aotearoa-centric approach to being a water regulator in New Zealand. But what it definitely means for us is that if you respect the water you're taking for drinking water purposes, that really you do want to know that you only took what was necessary and that you didn't lose large quantities of it on the way. And so just recognise that Te Mana o Te Wai really features very, very strongly in all we do, certainly perhaps much more than a predecessor who was the water regulator. That's it from me. I see Hugh Blake Mason. Yes, we're working with MFE and they've got the environmental monitoring review, and I see that we closed 10 days after that. Such is the nature of government departments, but we are working very closely. I will now hand over to another of our new stars, Isabel Oldfield, who's going to take you through the actual measures, and then I'll be at the end able to answer any questions you might have. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Bill. Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko tēnei te mihi ki ngā mana whenua o tēnei rohi. Ko Isabel aho, ke Taumata Arowai aho I mahi ana, e noho ana aho ke waikanai. No rere tēnā koutou, kia ora mai anō tātou katoa. So welcome everyone. My name is Isabel Oldfield and I'm a lead policy advisor in our regulatory team. And I'm just going to provide a bit more detail on the proposed environmental performance measures. So if I can have the next slide, please. So I'm just going to reiterate what Bill said because it's an important point. These requirements only apply to a subset of water suppliers, and that is the bigger water suppliers. So the councils, council-controlled organisations and government departments and the New Zealand Defence Force. We are talking separately with government departments and the New Zealand Defence Force because we understand that they have some unique characteristics to their supplies, and so some of the measures proposed in the current discussion document may not be as appropriate for those supplies. So the discussion document and the measures we're talking about today is really aimed at councils and council-controlled organisations. And as Bill said, we are focusing on drinking water networks first, with wastewater and stormwater to come later. Next slide, please. So this is a diagram that is in the appendix of the discussion document. It gives you an idea of the timing. So as Bill mentioned, we are phasing the introduction of those measures, and we're trying to phase them in recognition of how difficult we think it might be for councils to provide that information. And also some of the measures that we want to understand, there might not be good ways to measure those yet. So we need to do a bit more work for those measures that are coming later on. So the first lot of measures, as Bill said, will be introduced in the 1st July 2022, but it is important to note that that's when we ask councils to start recording that data. So the data period will be the 1st of July to the 30th of June each year, and you won't actually have to report that information until later in 2023 when we will be producing the first report. Next slide, please. So we've grouped the measures into 5 broad categories we're calling insights. I'm just going to run through the 5 categories and a bit of context on why we think these are important with some examples. The whole list of measures that we are proposing is found in Appendix 1 of the discussion document, and we're really interested to hear from people around whether they think the scope, we've got the scope right, whether you think we've missed any measures or we haven't quite got the phasing right. So the first insight is health protected. So this really comes down to the core reason we have these provisions in the Water Services Act, which is that we want to shine a light on the environmental performance of networks. So one of the examples under this is resource consent compliance. So in the first year, we just want to know what resource consents you hold and the expiry dates. And then later on, we want to dig more into compliance and come up with some measures to be able to report on compliance against resource consents. The second one, are services economically sustainable? This is really the key one where you'll get overlap with the economic regulator. And as Bill said, we are actively working with MB and ComCom around the information they may want to collect and how we can share information. But we think it's important for us to understand the economic sustainability of networks so we can understand the position they are in to be able to invest in the sustainability of the supply, the environmental impacts and public health impacts. So one of the measures we're proposing is to ask network operators to tell us what water supply capital investment projects they have coming up and how they're tracking against them and whether they're happening in the timeframe they expected them to happen, so we can really understand how that investment is driving improvements. The third insight is, are services reliable? So this is where we start thinking, and for example, are the pipes in a good condition where we're not going to see a lot of leakage or breaks in pipes? So we understand that at the moment, a lot of councils will measure this differently. And so from the 1st of July, we're really looking for you to provide us with any information you have on your pipe quality. That might be the age of the pipes, or there might be more detailed measures for determining pipe quality, but we just want you to report whatever you have. We are going to have to start thinking about how we introduce consistency in these measures, because the Water Services Act requires us to report annually on the performance of networks and compare the different networks. So we will be looking at how we can introduce that in later years so that we've got a consistent approach to some of these measures. Next slide, please. The fourth insight is, are resources used efficiently? So the example here is the network water loss. This is also about consumption and what the residential and commercial consumption is on the networks. So this is, we've got a range of ways of calculating network water loss within the discussion document. So we're interested in hearing from people whether they think those are appropriate, whether there are other ways we could do that. And the final insight is, are services resilient? So we're interested in how networks will operate during extreme weather events or due to climate change. We've also got in the first year some measures around sufficient firefighting capacity. And we know that some of these measures, for example, managing climate change risk, might take a bit of work to determine how we measure that. And that's why we're introducing them later in 2024 to start thinking about managed retreat and also planning for risks to networks due to more extreme weather events. Next slide, please. So public consultation closes on the 28th of March, as Bill mentioned. So this is high level. We'll outline the initial measures we think we're going to need information on. We're trying to give network operators an idea of where we're headed, which is why we've included all the measures for 2023 and 2024, although there's less detail on those because we will need to keep working on them. After consultation closes, we're looking to pull together a technical reference group to really delve into some of those details around the measures we want people to start collecting against from the 1st July 2022. So this will be confirming details like the definitions. So when we say we want you to tell us the population served, what do we actually mean by that? And also details around data collection and reporting. So what form do we want you to report this data in? So if you're interested in being part of that technical reference group to refine the measures, if you can email us at that email address on screen, we'll also put it in the chat so people can copy it. We are also currently talking to Mātauranga Māori experts to make sure we can also put a Te Ao Māori lens onto these measures. So during that targeted consultation, we'll start introducing some of those measures that reflect more of a Te Ao Māori perspective. Next slide, please. So these are just the links to the submission and again to that email address so that you can also ask questions through that email address. Again, submissions close on the 28th of March.
Thanks for that, Isabel and Bill. So I think a key thing is this, this is just the first of many engagements with you, and we really want to give everyone the opportunity to tweak and refine and provide the input that you can. So this, any questions that you've got, please pop them into the chat. I see we've already got a couple in there. And Isabel, it looks like the first one is for you. So Chris has asked, can you please provide more clarity on when the reporting will likely be required to be completed by each year, and when the reports will be published?
So that's something we will be refining through that targeted engagement. We do need to find a balance between giving councils enough time to provide the information and us enough time to write those reports, with also making sure that we're providing that information in a timely manner and the reports aren't out of date by the time we publish them. So it will be, I suspect we will be looking to have that data reported after a couple of months after the closing date of that data period, but that's something we're keen to work with councils to come up with an appropriate timeline. Great.
And we've got another question for you as well. Oh, sorry.
If I could add to that, Simone. The previous regime was quite slow sometimes in its reporting of what information it had. And it's one of the things that we've been charged with, which is doing it faster, which is why I think Isabel is like all of us, challenged with just how fast we can make it. So that's something we'll work on.
Great. So we've got a question from David, again for Isabel. So just in relation to consent compliance information, is it required from the 1st of July 2022 or is it 2023?
Thank you. And yeah, I've just pulled up the discussion document and I can see that the table 1 may be a little bit misleading in that respect, so sorry about that. So resource consent compliance is essentially what we've called the measure, and then the data points will be sitting under that measure. So from the 1st July 2022, we'll be asking, just as I said, what resource consents you have, and then you'll see there's a little box shaded a different colour. And that indicates that we're also going to add in some more data points in 2023, and that'll be around that consent compliance.
Anything you wanted to add to that, Bill? All right, and so Bridget has asked, will we be able to get a copy of the session? So yes, I believe we are recording it, and we will be publishing that on our website, or publishing a link to the recording on our website, hopefully very soon. Cool. All right, and a question from Julia. So Isabel, sorry, I think this is one for you again, but Bill, feel free to jump in. So regarding terminology, since you're wanting to include financial considerations, wouldn't sustainable performance measures or sustainability measures be more inclusive?
Thank you for that question. Yes, potentially, and we are very open to changing terminology. This is just, as Bill said, it's a discussion document. It's quite high level at this point, so very interested to hear in submissions if you think we haven't got the terminology quite right, or if you think there's another way we can refer to things.
If I can add some more there, it's quite difficult for us to move on this when the key partner that we'd like to be working with in terms of definitions and understandings, the economic regulator, is not yet formed. And so we are having some interesting discussions with a raft of people that are involved in the formation of that economic regulator to look at our terminology and to, I guess, make sure that we're asking questions that are ours and that the economic regulator will ask questions that are theirs.
Cool. And I see we've got a question from Chris. So this consultation is being done online, which prevents us from providing feedback from colleagues and getting sign-off from managers. Can we access the consultation in some other way? So what I would say is, obviously we're slightly hamstrung with COVID, but we are very much open to getting the information to you in the best way. I am sure, speaking on behalf of me and Isabel, would be happy to have a chat with you, and if you wanted to get in touch, we are happy to talk further and arrange what works for you. Great. All right, and another question for you, Isabel. So Glenn, you've asked, can you please provide some background on how the 5 insight areas relate to Taumata Arowai's organisational outcomes or areas of oversight? For example, providing information on planning for managed retreat seems like a long way from Taumata Arowai's area of responsibility. And how will this information drive regulatory oversight by Taumata Arowai? And Bill, you might like to add to that one as well.
Yes, so in the discussion document, we have a draft definition of environmental performance, because that needed to be our starting point when thinking about environmental performance measures. So we've considered that that scope is quite wide, and we've used the RMA definition of environment to inform that scope. However, we are also open to submissions from people if they feel that that scope is too wide. In terms of managed retreat, I think this plays into providing public health for communities, and also in terms of more broadly around climate change and threats to infrastructure, that can potentially have an environmental impact. So that's where we're going with that space, but happy to hear comments from people.
If I can add a bit, Simon, just I think with the questions we're receiving as a regulator, that's not a long way at all. We're certainly, not just in drinking water, but in wastewater as well, being asked an awful lot as to how we will ensure that future planning is done for capacity and growth in capacity for both drinking water and wastewater for infrastructure. And so I don't think that's a long way for us to ensure that growth is planned for, and where retreat is appropriate, retreat is planned for.
All right, I've got a question from Emily. So Emily, you've asked, will there be a chance to review, say, in 2 years' time to determine if the measures are still appropriate or if changes are needed? So I think on that one, we're really conscious that we're a new regulator. We don't want to take a set and forget approach to developing these measures, but at the same time, we need to provide certainty for operators that are captured by the measures. So very much we want the measures to be proportionate and serving the purpose of what the original intent of the Act was. So we will build in that review function, and part of this consultation period is also working out whether those measures are fit for purpose, whether the timing and phasing reflects capability as well. All right, these questions are coming in thick and fast. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, jumping around a wee bit. So, Isabel, a question for you. Will there be a double up on reporting carbon emissions from other agencies? And I think that's something Bill.
Yeah, so as Bill said earlier, we're working with a number of central government agencies to manage overlap, and the Climate Change Commission will be one of them. We're also interested to hear about any overlaps that people might be aware of, to make sure that we have covered them all, so we can make sure that data reporting is as efficient as possible.
Just want to total support what Isabel said. It would be an absolute waste of our effort and the effort of TLAs if we're duplicating. Even worse if we were asking questions in a slightly different way and getting sort of different answers and then utilising them. New Zealand doesn't need that.
Thank you both. So question around the scope of reporting requirements. So we use the term network. Does this cover pipes only, or will it extend to treatment plants as well? Isabel, anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, so we use network because that's the term used in the Water Services Act. Understand that network means different things to different people. So in this case, we're talking about the whole system. So the treatment plant and the pipes. And when we get to wastewater, it'll be the same, the wastewater treatment plant and the pipes. We will make sure that that is clear in our guidance documents when we're going through all our definitions.
Great. Cool. And Julia has asked, just wondering about the different engagement for New Zealand Defence Force and government. Everyone should have the same requirements for environmental performance, whether councils or government departments. Can you provide specific examples of how the differences in requirements are justified? So I can probably give an initial answer to that, then I might turn over to Isabel. So right now what we're trying to do is just build a picture of what those government departments look like and their supplies look like. So we're engaging with them separately. I think a lot of that, it's a work in progress, is probably a fair representation of, yeah, how collecting that information is going. But from there, we will look and see what those supplies look like and adjust timing and measures appropriately. But right now, we're still building that picture. Yeah.
If the question is in any way indicating that we will treat government departments differently from other large suppliers, the answer is no.
Isabel, anything you wanted to add there?
Maybe I can just give an example that comes to top of mind. One of the things that may not be appropriate for government departments is if we're looking at how much customers are billed for their water supply. So often government departments don't do that. So there are a few measures where we just might need to tweak things, or they're just not applicable. Another one is that with, for example, Department of Conservation, we need to understand not only the resident population, but the transient population, and how many days in the week that they, so for example, with a hut, you might just have people accessing the water for one day while they stay in the hut. So we just need to consider what are the different characteristics that make government departments slightly different.
Cool. And thank you, David. I've just seen your suggestion to use system when referring to the whole source to tap approach, and that is something that we've alluded to in the discussion document. We are slightly bound in the fact that the Act refers to network performance, but what we are looking at here is the source to tap and the impacts on the environment and public health. All right, sorry, jumping around the questions a wee bit. Okay, so Daniel has asked, you mentioned regulations/performance measures from other countries. How have these been considered? Isabel, did you want to add? Or sorry, Bill, let you go.
No, Isabel can do it.
So we've been particularly talking to our colleagues in Scotland and getting some advice from them around what measures they ask for from their suppliers, and we've used that as a bit of a base, as well as the measures that Water New Zealand are already asking. I know, Bill, if you want to add anything to that.
No, but to add to that, Water NZ has been very supportive as we've been working through this. They've been providing us advice, and also those collection of engineers that have been assisting Crown Infrastructure Partners through the period of kind of the COVID expenditure. They've been very useful too in terms of contributing their thoughts as to, and that's hence that they helped us build the discussion document.
Great, so I think we've come to the questions for now. I will just give it a few minutes. I just wanted to say this is exactly the type of feedback that we're really looking for. So really grateful if these thoughts get put into submissions. Obviously that's open until the 28th of this month, and we're really keen to hear all of your thoughts and questions about how everything you've raised, really.
Just Simone, I think we might have missed one from Brett saying, how do you think TA will distill the huge amount of information into something that is meaningful for suppliers and the general public? So yes, I can have a go answering that.
And yeah, absolutely, go for it, Isabel.
So we're actively working on that. What is the best way to present this in an annual report? And we don't expect it to just be a PDF report. We want to look at dashboards and other tools that mean that it's easily digestible information for the public. Initially, we are likely to follow the process that Water New Zealand follow for the National Performance Review, just because that works quite well. And then we'll build on that and see how we can tweak it to achieve what we need to under the Water Services Act.
Great. Cool. So another question from Hugh. Why Scotland? What about Australia, UK, Ireland as international benchmarks?
I'll answer that. That's relatively easy. The Scotland Water Commission, Alan Sutherland, provided us a gateway. If you're with me, that not only would he answering questions about Scotland and his staff answering questions about Scotland, but they were well aware of the UK and of Ireland, and in fact they were able to assist us with all sorts of other places. In terms of Australia, we got that pretty much straight from the horse's mouth, and we were able to work through Three Waters actually with various entities in Melbourne and in New South Wales in particular. So I wouldn't say we just hung off Scotland. Scotland were just the easiest ones to talk to, and they did an awful lot of collection of information for us. But please don't underestimate the part that those engineers that were working on the COVID and the request for information, those 8 engineers that pulled together for Crown Infrastructure Partners and helped you guys fill out the RFIs, they were really great.
Cool, and thank you for your comment, Alistair. We'll definitely look into what you've suggested on looking at the UK Environment Agency's reports. If we haven't already, Isabel, maybe all over that. Cool, and just some feedback from Emily. Yeah, really grateful, I guess, that this webinar is helpful and a helpful accompaniment to the discussion document that we've put out. Might just give it a few more minutes and see if there's any. Oh, here we go. One from Eric. All right. So in considering impacts of networks, is the intention to evaluate the network impact, the NET impact of a network? A water network is likely to provide long-term positive impacts on the social well-being of people and communities, but from time to time, events or faults may have a short-term negative impact on an ecosystem. Isabel, did you want to have a go at that one?
Yes, yeah, I can do. Yeah, it's a very good point. And we certainly don't want the reports that we write to be very negative. We want to highlight the positives as well and highlight the good things that water supplies are doing. So that's something we will be looking at in terms of how we present the information we've collected. Bill, did you want to add anything?
I think that's an excellent challenge. I'm not sure we're kind of really considering that right now, but it is interesting that that got raised with respect to the economic regulator as well. So I think it'll come up for all of us.
Okay, and we'll just pause there and see if there's any more questions. And if there aren't, so I'll get oh, here we go. One from Frank and Brett again. Great, so a lot of information could be included in asset management plans, which will be required for utility companies. Would that be enough? Any thoughts on that one from Bill? I see you nodding. Does you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I think we're still waiting to see kind of the fullness of the scope that'll be provided for by the water service entities, the 4 big entities. We're working very closely with the National Transition Unit as they kind of pull it together, as indeed many of the people on this webinar will be, especially over coming months. So I guess it really will be interesting for us how things will change when there are 4 big entities and they have to deliver asset management plans, and how we might utilise those as almost a reporting method, and how those might be a commitment to some of the things we talked about in terms of asking questions about long-term retreat and planning for growth, etc. And we've had an interesting series of meetings with I've forgotten the name, the Asset Management Agency, and talk through some of that, and certainly we would be very keen to support the water services entities having full and complete asset management plans. We also think that they've got to have that in order to be able to establish the priorities across their own areas.
Thanks for that, Bill. All right, so Isabel, Brett has asked, will aesthetic values be part of the first rank of information?
Yeah, so I think this comes back to the fact that we are writing 2 reports as Taumata Arowai. We've got the drinking water quality report, which is the replacement for the report that MOH issued each year. And then we've got the network environmental performance report, which is the focus of this discussion. So the reporting against the drinking water standards and those aesthetic values, that will go in the drinking water quality report. But there is likely to be a lot of overlap, and in a way that line is fairly arbitrary. So we're looking at how we can combine that information, and we're certainly going to make sure that we're asking for information ideally once in the same way, so that you don't have to provide that information to us separately.
Great, and one for you, Bill. Will there be consideration of ki uta ki tai when developing the measures, that one measure may have a benefit/disbenefit on another linked to the 3 waters group?
I believe that ki uta ki tai is basically almost a fundamental principle of Tāo Māori thinking and planning. So I don't see you can deliver against the Te Manawatā Wai principles unless you've given consideration to ki uta ki tai. And I guess that is a balance, and all of it's a balance. And I think that the previous question that I liked was kind of about that balance too. We're looking at the net impact of a network. So I see us getting better and better over the coming years as to how to judge these and recognise that a measure might have benefit or disbenefit on other parts of the system. But we're essentially starting off at a very early stage, and so your thoughts and your guidance are to my mind really appreciated. There's another question there that I like the look of. Many of the measures of performance go further than just considering drinking water as defined in the Act. I don't think they do. I'd be interested in your comments and submissions, because I think that the whole business of regulating drinking water under the new Water Services Act is very different from the previous regime. And so, to my mind, measures of performance, it's not just about considering drinking water, it's considering the impact and a ki utu ki tai approach to drinking water. So, and I think that is written into the Act. So I'd like to think that we're kind of sticking to the Act.
Cool. And a question from Julia: does Taumata Arowai have targets for these measures, and/or when will they be developed? So I think right now our focus is on the measures. We're developing our initial approach, and targets, you're right, it's something that's provided for in our legislation, and we will be working towards that down the track. But right now it's looking at the measures, and targets will evolve from there. Not sure if you wanted to add anything, Isabel.
No, I think you summarised that well.
And can I thank Nikki for answering the question much better than me in the chat?
All right, don't have any more questions for now. I'll give it a wee bit of time. It's been great seeing all of these questions trickle in, and it would be good for us to have a record as well as we continue refining our approach. All right, if there aren't any more questions, I will give you just over 15 minutes back in your afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. We've really appreciated it. It's great. I mean, it's a shame that we can't get out there and meet you all in person, but great to have a webinar and begin talking about our approach to network performance. And as we've said, this is the first of many opportunities you'll have to engage with us on this, and we're really keen to work with you and continue refining. And if you do have any questions, I believe Liana has popped the email address in the chat, so get in touch with us. Otherwise, we would love to receive your submissions. Any comments from you, Bill, to end?
Thanks for all your support and help. It's pretty hard work. We're 3.5 months old, and we're racing to do a whole lot of stuff and set up a new regime. It's your feedback and your understanding that we really value.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.